let's get a little bit of analysis now. And analysts say a very difficult task lies ahead for President Cyril Ramaphosa, who, of course, is set to deliver his 7th State of the Nation address this evening. The address takes place at a time where the country's economic crisis has worsened by Eskom's woes. Now, at the same time, the president is expected to report back on efforts to root out corruption, as well as address the many social ills facing the country. To talk more about this, we're joined by Director and Chief Economist at Econometrix, Azar Jammine. Lovely to see you, Azar. Welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Leanne. Good morning to you and your viewers.
So we must always remember that the State of the Nation address is one where the president comes and recaps and talks about the promises that he has made, him and his government have made, and what they've managed to deliver on, and then talk about what they promise for the future. So let's look back and let's perhaps start off with what has been promised and what has been achieved since those promises. How are they doing? How is the president doing?
I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to recognize that a lot of what the president has promised in the past has actually not materialized. Not everything. I think there has been some progress in fighting corruption, a little bit. People, however, are frustrated that there hasn't been enough. Secondly, he succeeded in auctioning out a broadband spectrum. Thirdly, the government managed to finally agree to allow private sector companies to start producing their own electricity and to sell this into the grid. But again, we're not seeing much progress that has actually emerged in that regard. On the contrary, there appear to have been members of the president's own government who have been putting stumbling blocks in the way of the implementation of many of these intentions. And that speaks to the heart of one of the problems that he faces, and that is that he's got a divided government, divided party, some of whom are obsessed with ideology that government should control everything in the economy, and the idea of getting the private sector involved is seen as bad news. So long as that is the case, I think the president will struggle to make progress in implementing what he has promised. Yeah. And that is the dilemma that he faces today. Is as good as his State of the Nation addresses have been in the past, and I mean, they have been impressive in terms of their delivery and their content, but people are going to turn around and say, yes, you're promising this again, but, why must we take you seriously this time? Yeah. He has cried wolf too often now, and people are saying, hang on, where's the beef, so to speak?
And this is the big problem, is that, as a general South African, and when you listen, when you speak to people, when you hear the sentiments coming from South Africans, there is a major trust deficit that's taking place right now, because, you look around, and as you say, the deliveries there, the promises sound great, but, this is the 7th State of the Nation address that the president is delivering, and we're looking and thinking, we kept on having all of these promises of this new dawn, and things are going to change, and those that are behind corruption are going to be taken away and put behind bars, and we're going to turn around the energy system, we're going to turn around everything. And yet here we sit and dare I say, worse off than we were before he came in as president, because that is how it's feeling at the moment. This trust deficit is a major problem, one would imagine. I mean, Azar, what does this do for the morale of a country if you do not trust your leaders?
This is what is debilitating at the moment, and I don't know what the president has to say today to actually improve that trust deficit. In the past, people have been prepared to give him a chance. The trouble now is that most have given up and are not even willing to contemplate giving him another chance. The only way that you can get over that trust is to start doing the job that you've promised. And even if people don't fully trust you, to actually start showing that and proving that you actually are serious about but that's not been happening.
Yeah.
That is the dilemma.
So let's talk about Eskom. I mean, that's the major issue that this year, I mean, we have had load shedding every single day since, I think it was October last year, if not more. I'm not counting, but it's just progressively getting worse. We're currently sitting in stage 3 and 4 until further notice, and that's just indefinitely. Now, we've heard yesterday that 6 Eskom power stations have been identified as the main cause of the country's rolling blackouts. These need to be fixed, they need to be repaired, and this will offer short-term and long-term power. However, this is not going to stop where we are with the power crisis. What does the president do about this? Eskom is the big issue we need to talk about.
The obvious solution that has already been identified, and the president has actually worked towards enabling this, is to allow many people in the private sector to stop producing their own electricity in various ways, most of it probably from renewable energy, and to allow that electricity, the surplus that is produced by the private sector, to start being sold back to Eskom to try and alleviate the crisis. But we're still seeing, people, a lot within government are dragging their heels in terms of allowing and facilitating such an exercise. And the dilemma that we have is, even if this process is successful, it's probably going to take at least 2 years before we start seeing results that alleviate the energy crisis. So, unfortunately, for the next year or two, the die is cast, and this is what is scary, especially when you consider that during the winter season, the demand for electricity is somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 megawatts higher than it is right now in summer. So that if you've already got stage 3 or 4 in summer, you're heading for stage 8 in winter, or even worse than that. Yeah. And that's the dilemma that the government faces. I don't know how it imbues the hope that actually it won't turn out to be so bad.
I mean, when we look at the cost, and I know we've spoken about this many times, but let's revisit it. What does it cost South Africa a day? I know at one point when we were at stage 6 and we were saying that I think we would lose about 4 billion rand a day to the economy due to the load shedding. Now we're sitting at stage 4. The number can't be lower. I mean, this is costing South Africa dramatically. And when you look around, you see how it's costing South Africa, because things are not being kept. Things are falling apart, if we want to put it in that way. I mean, you can see that this is a very, very struggling economy.
Without a doubt, if it's of any use, the South African Reserve Bank in its latest Monetary Policy Committee spoke about its calculations forecasting that this intensified load shedding will knock 2% off GDP growth over and above what we might otherwise have had. And that is why it is now forecasting growth of 0.3% for this year. Bearing in mind that the population is growing at 1.5%, that means people are going to go backwards by at least 1% on average this year. And what really bothers people more than anything at the moment is somehow up to stage 4, people feel, certainly with stage 2, people feel that they can cope with it, and many have bought generators and or solar panels. But once you get to stage 6, which seems like an increasingly frequent potential occurrence, electricity is off for so much of the time that things start packing up. Your appliances start packing up, your water reticulation starts suffering, and all sorts of things break down in the economy. So, once you move from stage 4 to stage 6, there's a lot more damage that is done to the economy that from which you can't recover very quickly.
Mm-hmm. I want to quote as well from the SONA last year. We move away from Eskom because I know that this is going to be spoken about ad nauseum today, one would imagine, because that's a big thing. One of the other promises that the president said last year during SONA was the whole talk of this social compact To quote, he said, "We've given ourselves 100 days to finalize a comprehensive social compact to grow our economy, create jobs and combat hunger. This work will build on the foundation of the economic reconstruction and recovery plan, which remains our common program to rebuild the economy." This never materialized. It has not even reached Parliament as yet. Now, that was just one promise that was made last year. People are struggling, the economy is not growing, and jobs are not being created. Promises are being made, but they are not being fulfilled. Let's revisit that. I mean, whatever happened to that social compact?
You know, the starting point for reaching a social compact is to reach agreement about a social compact within your own ruling party. And the real problem that we have is that there is no agreement within the ruling party. The factional divide is really a divide that prevents a social compact from taking place. On the one hand, you have the so-called radical economic transformation, which is punting government must control everything and attack all the capitalist institutions in the country. And on the other side, you've got Ramaphosa-led faction that says, well, the only solution to our problems is to get the private sector more involved into and lending the private sector skills to actually help promote the implementation of a lot of the programs that we have. And within the government itself, there is no cohesion. So how do we start talking about a social compact when from your very starting point, the people who are supposed to implement or introduce a social compact are not unified in their vision of what it entails?
And then finally, as I wrap this conversation up, another promise from the President is to implement exactly what came out of the Zondo Commission, to eradicate corruption from the ANC and from government. And, you know, we look back now, obviously there's a cabinet reshuffle that's going to come, but the key players, the major players are still there. They are still present. We're still looking at them and saying, you know, where is justice in all of this? And again, the false promises from the President are there for us to see. You know, this again is a great worry, is that are we in safe hands when it comes to running these major sectors that these ministers are in control of, and yet there are many allegations against them of mass corruption?
You're absolutely correct, and I think one of the most devastating outcomes in recent months is to see the appointment of the election of the new National Executive Committee of the ANC, and to identify a whole host of these characters who have been accused of corrupt activities or other allied misdemeanors, and they're still there, and they are now in a position of governing and within Ramaphosa's regime. When you have that, he knows that he's going to have opposition to a whole host of things that he wants to introduce. He's going to have opposition from within his own ranks. And so that translates into no implementation. And that's what people are very complaining about and disillusioned about.
All right, Azar, we leave it there. This evening, 7 o'clock, we'll hear more. Director and Chief Economist at Econometrix, Azar Jammine, speaking to us about some of the expectations from President Ramaphosa's SONA address, but more importantly, looking back at the promises that were made at the previous SONA and what has actually been achieved. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like many of those have been achieved to date.